Showdown in Vegas, LSU versus USC. Brian Kelly, year 3. Lincoln Riley going into year 3. Joe, another game where LSU matches up with an out-of-conference opponent on a Sunday out in Vegas, in Sin City. How do you expect this game going for the Tigers and the Trojans?
You mentioned at the beginning of the show, these teams are eerily similar to one another. You've got two teams replacing former Heisman Trophy winners that were consecutively the first and second overall picks. You had underwhelming, terrible defenses last year with new defensive coordinators coming in to completely rework things and reimagine how you're going to play on defense. I lean LSU right now because I think that the deficiencies for USC that are going to show up in this game still, that were problems for them last year, were not just bad scheme by Alex Grinch, but it was no intent to tackle. There was no effort to tackle. It was all just trying to turn the ball over. None of those guys had any technique when it came to breaking down and actually tackling guys. I think that D'Anton Lynn eventually gets these guys right, and they end up being a lot better than everybody anticipates that they can be. But week 1 against an LSU team that's going to have playmakers, multiple good running backs, a quality receiver room, an experienced guy in Garrett Nussmeier who's at least been in situations before as a first-time starter this year. I have to lean with LSU for all those reasons.
I'm not that sold on this than you are. I said last year when they lost in the opener, I'm not doing it. You got to go out there and prove it. Now, Joe, I think the difference is we've had 14 of the 21 days that LSU was out at practice. Brian Kelly gave us the full access. I worry about Garrett Nussmeier turning the ball over, and if you're a USC fan, you should worry about Miller Moss turning the football over if you watch that spring game. I think Brian Kelly put it best today when he said that Blake Baker and D'Anton Lynn are cut from the same cloth. Joe, USC sent 40 different pressures in a spring game. What are they going to do in an actual game? Mm-hmm. The thing that I look at in this matchup that I think that LSU can lean on would be that their offensive line is really good. Now, a lot of people have made a lot about USC and saying last year, their defense stinks, Lincoln stinks, they all stink, whatever. Joe, I've watched too much film of them this past weekend and just in the entire offseason to say that. They have some athletes. If you're LSU, you got to lean on that offensive line and you got to run the football. You got to go old school Brian Kelly, line up, punch somebody in the mouth, and run right at them. I think you do have more athletes than them. I think you have the better staff than them, and I think that you can accomplish that. They have the better staff.
Well, the staff part I don't disagree with. I don't know if I agree with the athletes part, though, because, I mean...
Harold Perkins, end of story.
Zachariah Branch, I'm not saying end of story with that.
Zachariah Branch in P4 literally had only, I think it was freshman. 1/16 of his catches came from there. He did not perform in Power 5 football games last year at all. In the return game, he is. Joe, I'm
just saying they have some silly recruits that they've brought in at receiver, at tight end, at running back. Look, I think that it's an even matchup, but I don't think it's like a guaranteed LSU has better athletes than USC. Okay, fair.
Okay. I just think that you have better athletes than they do. Before I got really interrupted, where USC matches up, I think is what you were hinting at. Their wide receiver room versus LSU's DBs is going to be a big question going into this game. Can LSU's defensive back room actually do something and have a pulse? I don't know. I've seen them be better through these 14 days. I know that they've been better. They've given Garrett Nussmeier a lot of issues. I worry about Nussmeier and turnovers, but I think, look, he's going to be out there gunslinging and throwing the football around. I have no idea what to make of this game other than that LSU's offensive line, you can lean on and run the football. I think they're going to play a little bit of keep away from USC. I really do. I think they're going to send a whole bunch more heat than they did last year. And, Joe, I think Harold Perkins has shown through this camp and offseason that he's had a really good one. Now it's time for LSU to translate it. I think the same about USC though, man. I look at that defensive line and that front seven. They're not as bad as people are making them out to be. They're just not. And
they got the tools for D'Anton Lynn to be able to cook up
have tools.
A good game.
Yeah, they have tools. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are vastly underestimating what Lincoln Riley has assembled in the last couple of years. So I just look at that and say, if there is one big mismatch, I would say it's LSU's O-line versus that running game versus USC's defensive line front seven.
The point you bring about how LSU probably going to try to run the ball more, I think is really important. And it goes in line with what we've said about, and I've said about USC going into the season. It's a daunting task for them to be able to, I was reading an article today, though, that they were talking about preparing essentially to be able to match up in the Big Ten. They were telling their guys just to eat. And there were all those videos and those pictures that were put out by the USC strength and conditioning program of all these guys that got ridiculously big. I don't know if that necessarily translates into the first game. It could help them later on in the season against the Big Ten. But I think that LSU with that offensive line is going to try to bully them up front and try to run the ball as much as possible. That is going to lead to success for them. The inverse of this, for USC to win, I think that they do need to generate as many splash plays as possible. You know, they need to connect with the Zachariah Branch over the top. They need to get back to the level of offensive production that we're used to seeing from Lincoln Riley. Not that they were bad last year, but it felt like they were just playing a different type of scheme.
In offense.
Yeah, they absolutely were. They absolutely were one of the best offenses in the country, but it just, they need to stick with what works because you don't have Caleb Williams. You know, Miller Moss needs a little bit of help, a little bit more help than Caleb Williams does.
I'm going to continue to disagree with you on one massive thing here. What is it?
I still don't think that Miller Moss is set up perfectly to be, you know, better than Caleb in this offense.
No, but he's going to play inside the system more. Dude, I've watched more film on them than anything, and you cannot convince me that Caleb Williams played inside the system. You can't convince me of it.
But he doesn't. Miller Moss doesn't have any improvisational skills. You know,
improv doesn't mean shit when you're getting your teeth kicked in. And Notre Dame proved that shit to him last year. Joe, the throws and the shit that he was doing last year was abysmal, and you know it. And you know what else? Here's another thing that I throw your way. Dylan Gabriel at Oregon is a prime example. Stetson Bennett is a prime example of sometimes in college football, when you play inside the system, you will win more football games.
You win more football games, but Heisman Trophy winners over the past 2 years have been two of the best improvisational quarterbacks in the game that we've seen in the past decade or more.
Hold on. Jaden Daniels, yes, would run and improvise to some extent.
He played within the system.
95% of what he did was playing inside the system.
Yes, I know.
In your last segment and say that, Denbrock, and then say that he was improvising and he made
No. That's not what I'm not saying that Jaden was purely improvising, but all I'm just trying to point out here is
you're too low on Miller Moss, man. I'm sorry.
You're too high. He played one game against backups. It's absurd.
And you know what? What has Lincoln Riley done with quarterbacks? You hate him so much.
I forget that for a second. Yes, he has produced good quarterback play.
4 Heisman Trophy winners. Why?
Sure. Yes, he has. This is the least talented quarterback he's had.
That we think. And you know what else?
We know.
People said the same exact shit about Baker Mayfield when he was a walk-on.
He ain't Baker Mayfield.
You didn't even know who Baker Mayfield was until Lincoln Riley got there. He was a walk-on. There is something to be said when you look at Lincoln Riley and what he's done with quarterbacks.
I just think that's so arbitrary to just immediately assume Miller Moss is going to be good because
when he's got that many Heisman Trophy winners
he obviously has success, but I'm not going to go ahead and crown this kid to be good until I see him actually. You had said that he could be better in the system than Caleb Williams was. That is crowning him. Of being a highly successful college quarterback.
you just lost your argument when you said that Caleb Williams likes to improvise, and then saying that Miller Moss won't play inside a system more.
I didn't say that. My point wasn't that he likes to improvise. My point was that if shit breaks down, he could improvise and make plays that he needed to. Am I yelling that much? Am I mic that loud?
You always say it's me. You were the one that came in here and started yelling at me. All right.
You started yelling first.
I think that LSU and USC is going to be within a 7-point football game, and I'm just going to lean on LSU's offensive line. Your thought?
Wait, sorry, I got distracted. I got distracted by a comment. What did you say?
I think that this is going to be between around a 7-point game.
Mm-hmm.
I give it to LSU, and just the simple nature of that they're going to lean on their running game and their offensive line, and that prevails from them. But I will say this: do not be surprised if Harold Perkins is the talk when we get out of this game.
I think it's a 4-point spread right now. I would take LSU to cover. I think LSU if either team wins, you just said that they could win by a touchdown. That's more than 4 points.
I thought the spread was 6.
No, it was
6.5. 7.
I saw it was 4.
Oh, okay.
Earlier.
Oh,
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think whoever wins by a touchdown.
If LSU loses, it's because Garrett Nussmeier turns the ball over late. He's been known to turn the football over. He's got to play clean football.
Yep.
All right.
This video is sponsored by the online fitness training camp presented by Chris Gates Fitness. When I first started talking about Chris, about partnering with our show, not only was I excited to have a fitness sponsor for our pod, but more importantly, when I found out about how he can help people achieve their goals, I was even more bought in, because when the football season starts, it is so tough to stay on top of things and also to be able to enjoy yourself on Saturdays when it's game day. With Chris Gates Fitness's online training camp, you're going to be able to effectively stay focused, consistent, burn fat, build muscle, and do it with a like-minded community of individuals working towards the same thing. On top of this, you're going to be able to get direct coaching from Chris and the ability to ask him questions with an access to a live Q&A where you can get direct, personalized support from Chris himself. Don't wait any longer. If you're trying to get in shape during this fall and you want to be able to do it with the right support system, head on over to chrisgatesfitness.com/training camp or click the link in the description. And you need to do it today because you can get the first month. Personal training is expensive, folks. The first month for only $10 when you use that code RuffinoJoe. Don't wait any longer. Head on over there. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.